The world held its breath this week as Canada rejected a major U.S. infrastructure project, a proposed high-tech corridor to Alaska. News feeds from Tokyo to Berlin lit up with the headline, sending shockwaves through Washington. Former President Donald Trump, a key backer, expressed disbelief. This decision has thrown a spotlight on the often underestimated relationship between the U.S. and Canada. It's more than a disagreement over a road. It's about sovereignty and economic independence. For the U.S., the corridor was a strategic link to Alaska, reducing reliance on vulnerable sea and air routes. For Canada, the project raised serious concerns: environmental protection and indigenous rights. The world is watching because this could signal a major shift in North American geopolitics. The corridor would have included a high-speed rail, multi-lane highway, and energy pipeline. Supporters called it visionary. Opponents called it dangerous. Ottawa's decision has set the stage for a complex, uncertain future. American officials scramble to understand the implications, while Canadian leaders stand firm. This is about two close allies hitting a major roadblock, literally and figuratively. It affects trade, security, and lives on both sides of the border. What happens next could redefine their partnership for decades. The story is still unfolding, with consequences far beyond the wilderness where the road was meant to be built. The world is watching, and the stakes are high. To understand today's conflict, we must look back. The US and Canada have a long history of monumental joint efforts, most famously the original Alaska Highway. Built during World War II, it was a response to fears of a Japanese invasion of Alaska. The route crossed over 1,500 miles of harsh terrain, mountains, muskeg, forests. Many thought it impossible, but Canada agreed, and the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers got to work. In less than 9 months, they connected Dawson Creek, British Columbia, to Delta Junction, Alaska. The highway became a symbol of what the two nations could achieve together. After the war, it opened remote regions to settlement, tourism, and resource extraction. For decades, it stood as a symbol of US-Canada friendship and the world's longest undefended border. This history set a precedent and expectation for future cooperation. But the world of the 1940s is very different from today. The original highway was built with little regard for environmental impact or indigenous rights. Now, central concerns. The legacy of the first Alaska Highway set a high bar for partnership, but also left complex lessons. Today, priorities have shifted. The past explains the bond, and the current divergence. Canada's cautious approach to new projects is shaped by this history. The story of cooperation is now one of careful negotiation. The past is prologue to today's standoff. The rejected project was far more ambitious than the original Alaska Highway. Officially called the Alaska North America Economic Security Corridor, it was a multifaceted plan backed by U.S. business and political leaders. The vision, a 4-lane, all-weather highway, high-speed freight rail, energy pipelines, and fiber optic cables. Supporters argued it would unlock economic potential, create jobs, and secure a reliable land link to Alaska. The corridor promised to shorten travel times, boost supply chains, and bring high-speed internet to remote communities. The U.S. Congress called it a matter of strategic national interest, citing military and economic advantages. The proposal gained momentum, with American officials offering financial incentives and invoking past collaborations. The U.S. believed the benefits were so compelling that Canada would have to agree. But Canada saw things differently. The plan was detailed, comprehensive, and heavily promoted. Yet, despite the diplomatic push, Canada said no. The U.S. miscalculated Canada's priorities. The project's scale and impact proved too controversial. The vision of a 21st-century corridor was stopped at the border. The answer was a firm rejection. On August 4, 2025, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau announced Canada's rejection of the Alaska corridor. The decision, after extensive review, was clear. The project was not in Canada's national interest. Trudeau cited unacceptable environmental risks and infringement on Indigenous rights. Several First Nations communities along the route had voiced strong opposition. The Minister of Environment highlighted the threat to pristine wilderness and species at risk. The environmental assessment found the damage could not be mitigated. The government acknowledged economic benefits but concluded they were outweighed by environmental and social costs. Canada asserted its sovereignty and right to set its own development priorities. The rejection was framed as a pro-Canadian, not anti-American move. Canada chose its own path, even at the cost of angering its closest ally. The political fallout was immediate. In Washington, shock and anger dominated the response. Former President Trump called it a betrayal, urging retaliation. The The current U.S. administration expressed deep disappointment and recalled its ambassador for consultations. Some in Congress called for a review of cross-border agreements and possible new tariffs. The goodwill that defined the relationship is now under strain. This decision could chill future U.S.-Canada cooperation. Both countries are partners in defense, trade, and environmental management. Trust is essential. Canadian officials brace for tough negotiations on unrelated issues as the U.S. seeks leverage. Domestically, Trudeau's decision won praise from environmentalists and Indigenous leaders, but criticism from business groups. The move has drawn a sharp line in Canadian politics. The long-term impact on Trudeau's legacy remains to be seen. The special relationship is entering a frosty period. The diplomatic deep freeze has begun. The economic consequences are massive. The $100 billion project would have brought a boom to Western Canada. Now those jobs and investments are gone. Alaska faces higher shipping costs and stunted economic growth. The ripple effects will be felt across the integrated North American economy. The decision sends a negative signal to investors about the risks of cross-border projects. Companies may hesitate to invest in ventures needing both governments' approval. Regulatory chill could slow investment in energy and manufacturing. Even close allies can derail major economic initiatives for political reasons. Communities along the route lose out on jobs and opportunities. Trade disputes and tariffs could raise prices for consumers in both countries. One rejection could create economic headwinds for millions. At the heart of Canada's rejection is a clash of values: economic growth versus environmental protection. The corridor would have cut through some of North America's last great wilderness, threatening caribou, grizzlies, and vital habitats. Environmental groups' fierce opposition resonated in Ottawa. The risk of pipeline spills and habitat destruction was deemed too high. The government's assessment found the impacts could not be mitigated. Canada has made international commitments to reduce emissions and conserve biodiversity. By rejecting the corridor, Canada drew a green-red line. Some landscapes are too valuable to sacrifice. Large-scale projects now face a strict environmental standard. Geopolitical experts see this as a defining moment in U.S.-Canada relations. Dr. Amelia Thorne of the North American Policy Institute says Canada is asserting its autonomy, no longer automatically aligning with U.S. priorities. Canada is rebalancing, strengthening ties with Europe and the Indo-Pacific. The rejection signals a shift toward national interests, environmental goals, and Indigenous reconciliation. The Arctic's growing strategic importance adds complexity, with the US, Russia, and China vying for influence. The corridor was partly a US move to secure Arctic logistics. Canada's rejection complicates that. Canada wants to avoid being drawn into great power competition in its own backyard. By blocking the corridor, it retains control over northern development and sovereignty. Dr. Thorne calls it a calculated risk, betting the relationship is resilient enough to survive. The two economies are deeply intertwined. A complete rupture is unlikely. Diplomatic tension will persist, but shared interests will force both sides back to the table. The dynamic has changed. Canada has shown it will use its leverage. The US must now approach negotiations with new respect for Canadian autonomy. The chessboard has shifted. The world is watching how both sides play their next move. The rejected Alaska corridor is the story of a road not taken, one that promised prosperity but was deemed too costly for the environment and Canada's identity. The image of this phantom highway will linger in policymakers' minds. The decision closes one chapter of cooperation and opens another, one requiring negotiation and compromise. It forces us to ask, what is true progress? Is it measured in steel and oil, or in wild places and sustainable futures? Canada's choice is a declaration that some things aren't for sale. The path forward for both nations is now uncertain. Diplomatic friction and economic uncertainty will follow. The world's longest undefended border is more than a line, it's a shared ideal. The challenge is to ensure that ideal endures. This story is far from over, and its consequences will continue to unfold.